Nice. And just so folks know, the reason we do record these meetings is, for people to be able to access them later for educational purposes and everything, right? So that's why KTLA, no KTLA, we're here recording it, right? So yes, welcome to the meeting, everyone. Again, my name is Nadia Khan, and I'm with Stop LAPD Spine Coalition. Also a teacher, so definitely very personally invested in this. And so today, what we're going to do is, and it's great to see, hear some new folks too. So welcome to the space. And please feel free to share your email. We do working meetings in between where we we go deeper into the work to strategize, create art, curriculum development. So these meetings are more sort of a webinar where we can share some of the work, and a lot of times we'll have our partners and folks come on and share too. So yeah, if you are new and would like to get more deeply involved in some of the work, please feel free to message one of us with your email. And so yeah, so today I'll give just a little bit of a background on the war on youth fight and some of the programs we're fighting, and then I'll pass it off to a couple other folks where we're going to be looking at some what's called PRAs, so Public Records Act requests, which we'll explain more deeply once we get there. But a quick snapshot is basically where the public uses what's called the Freedom of Information Act, a national law, and PRA is the California version. So it's our way of basically forcing the state to share public information with us, information that they really, of course, wouldn't want to voluntarily share. And so it's how we're able to find out about a lot of the programs and how they target our communities. So we'll go into more explanation on that once we get there. But just to start off with a little bit of background, when we talk about the war on youth, obviously there's many wars on youth, and I feel like all of us who are present are here because we're aware of different ways that young people, especially Black youth, brown youth, Indigenous youth, Muslim, trans youth are targeted, right? And so, so for us, we're specifically looking at how, the narrative of the terrorism narrative, the violent extremism narrative has been used to target young people, but really has seen a major increase, that in addition to the gang narrative. And, so the last, 30 plus years, the gang narrative has been very actively used to target Black and brown youth. And like I said, now what we're seeing more for some time now is this label of terrorism or violent extremist, right? And that being used to target the same youth who have been historically targeted under just different names too, right? And so within that, a couple of the programs are, one is called Countering Violent Extremism, and we call it's CVE for short. And that was started by the Department of Homeland Security. And really in 3 pilot cities, LA being one of them, right? And then Boston and Minneapolis. Thanks for putting that in there, Akil. And so LA has really been, I guess, a home for this program. And so what it essentially does is it names various behaviors as potentially suspicious. And really this falls under a larger umbrella of behavioral surveillance. There's many examples of how young people are targeted simply for behaviors, right? And we've heard and seen various historical examples of that. And so within this behavioral surveillance CVE umbrella, one of the programs that the FBI started in 2016 was called Preventing Violent Extremism in Schools, or PVE. And Akil's putting some of this in the chat. So if you're just like, what the hell, like all this alphabet soup, right? It's being put in there. And what PVE does is it targets specifically K through 12 and names behaviors such as being too much into your culture, expressing anger or frustration, being in poverty, being feeling isolated, being a migrant. It states these behaviors as indicators that a young person could become a terrorist or violent extremist, right? So really behaviors that are so core to being an adolescent. And being critical of U.S. foreign policy, right? So a lot of just very sort of common, and the idea is the DHS and FBI claim that that they're getting away from policing. So again, moving towards this community policing name, which we know is extremely dangerous because it gives people this idea that, oh, well, the police aren't involved. But really what it's doing is having fellow community members, trusted people essentially snitch on each other. And so PVE encourages teachers to snitch on their students to snitch on each other. And under this guise of quote, less policing, right? But we know it's essentially more policing, and it's just much more insidious. And so what we've seen now is some of the most recent one is the LA version 2 is under this umbrella called TVTP, which is Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention. And this is sort of now the umbrella that's housing these policies, these programs. And the LA specific one is called, and I know I'll put that on for folks too. The LA specific one is called PATHE, which stands for Providing Alternatives to Hinder Extremism. And again, all of this is in the chat for you to just sort of, take note of as well. And PATHE, well, before I get into PATHE, folks had defeated a CVE grant several years back that was for over $400,000, and it went to the mayor, went to Garcetti, who was mayor at the time, and really due to a lot of youth showing up, a lot of community pressure, he was forced to reject this grant. And so despite that, a few years later, just in very typical form, the government rebrands and says, okay, well, people didn't like this name, so let's give it this name, right? And we'll add this. So basically they came back then with PATHE. And despite, a lot of pressure against it, a grant was passed. And so with that grant, it basically under PATHE, it approves a team of over 500 informants, basically, which consist of teachers, faith leaders, counselors, right? So basically figures that youth are constantly interacting with and are told to trust, right? I know for myself as a teacher, I'm like, I would never want to do this, right? But of course, we know there's educators and people who do participate in these things, right? And so this team essentially serves to help report these quote unquote suspicious behaviors. And so within that, also what we're seeing is what they call like a triaging, kind of like when you go to the hospital, they triage you, they identify what's wrong with you and to then see how to treat you, right? So this language is woven into PATHE and really bringing in the mental health unit, the gang unit, to basically diagnose, right, what's wrong with these youth. And I'm putting that in quotations because it's just gross, right? And so basically through PATHE, they're then say, okay, well, this is what's wrong with them. And this is how, as the state will, quote, help them, right? Which essentially is code for criminalize them. And so I just wanted to give that background because we're going to be talking about some of the documents we're requesting to get more information on PATHE because, like any program that targets young people, it's very dangerous, right? And so, and of course, really the youth being targeted are Black youth, are brown youth, are Muslim youth, Indigenous youth, queer youth, really youth who are otherized or deemed other and have historically been criminalized. So we're going to be looking at that today, as well as, the GRID program. We're going to talk about that connection too. So I'll go ahead and I'll pause there. And before I pass it off for some of the PRA stuff, I just wanted to see, I know I shared quite a bit. So does anyone have any questions or just any comments about that? And I know it's a lot of info, especially for maybe folks who haven't heard this before. But yeah. And on that note, we offer, and we've been in different spaces with youth, adults, organizations to go into much deeper workshops on this. So I just wanted to also name that. This is kind of a quick snapshot. Oh yeah, Matios, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. I just wanted to piggyback off a couple of the dope things you said, and especially for folks that may not be familiar with Stop LAPD Spying altogether. We're a community-based abolitionist group. that's working to dismantle police surveillance, and we're based in Skid Row. And so, we do that dismantling through collective research, like Nadia just described in these rooms. And that work does tackle different facets of police surveillance. There's a data-driven policing work group, which meets on the fourth Tuesday of every night at the same time. There's a gender and sexuality work group that meets on the first Tuesday of every night. And then we have our general meetings on the third. This is, of course, the second Tuesday of the month with a focus on the war on youth. And I think, that the key word in kind of describing what we do is abolitionist, right? We don't participate in any, the work we do isn't driven by this notion that we have a right to privacy, right? Or it's not about knowing your rights in any way. It is very much with the knowledge that these systems are in place to target the most vulnerable parts of our community, our most vulnerable communities, and dismantle them. But that's the goal of the work that we do. And I really do think the War on Youth work group, and this is especially where I'm grateful for the leadership of Nadia and Akhil, as educators and as just fierce organizers, really does embody abolition in that way. Because like Nadia was just describing, there are all these programmatic evolutions of how the surveillance is kind of happening. And you're likely confused. I was confused the first time I heard about it, right? That's the intention behind this like slurry of initialisms, right? And so part of the work that Nadia described is understanding how these things function, how they're executed, and getting rid of them. The other part that I think is uniquely abolitionist within the War on Youth work group is cultivating a culture of resistance among youth. And that's the other aspect of what Nadia was talking about, these deeper workshops. Another thing we've started doing, like I said, Nadia and Akhil are also educators. So we have the luxury of having, people with experience like educating youth. And so we've been lucky enough to be in high school classrooms and spaces with youth. Most recently, we've been lucky enough to even have summer workshops with a program called STEAM to the Future, which uses STEAM programs, science, technology, engineering, art, and math, to nurtures those disciplines within youth to better communities. And so we've been able to work with STEAM to the Future during their Freedom Summer Camp, help talk to kids about abolition, about how recent and new and fragile these structures like policing or borders actually are, to talk about the history of how anti-indigeneity has thrived in this country, how anti-Blackness has thrived in this country, and how we can disrupt those systems. And that's led us to create lesson plans and curriculums that we use today. And maybe I'll pass it to Akhil, if you don't mind, to talk about kind of the work we're doing now, and how that's expanding.
Absolutely. So this has been a lot, especially for the new people, but we just wanted to make sure that you saw maybe some of the people who actually only Maraki and Nadia just joined.
Yes,
So
that's me, don't worry.
okay.
Yeah.
So everybody else should have access to the chat where we put the 4 different meetings of the month, one on each Tuesday evening. But we also have, those are the public recorded meetings. And the general meeting is often, or maybe now usually, in person in Skid Row, which is our organizational home at LA Community Action Network. That's our general meeting. But we have meetings specifically for this fight, for the fight against the war on youth, against these extremism and terrorism programs that are targeting our youth with these names. And currently, because of our workshops with youth that are on Wednesday, we have moved those working meetings. So if you would like to get involved with this group in strategizing and doing research in a more sort of like in-depth way, in lesson planning and doing a variety of other things with us, it's the first and the third Thursday of the month at 5 p.m. And we'll be having our next one 2 days from now, which is the third Thursday of the month. So it's the first and the third Thursday at 5 p.m. I can put that in the chat. That's where you can, and yeah, you can get the Zoom link by emailing stoplapdspying@gmail.com. those are our working meetings for this group. So in case you haven't had enough of us after this meeting, that's where to find us. Now, the next thing that I wanted to do is actually give you all a little taste of what we're currently working on in our working meetings, which is we're doing a lot of research into PATHE. We're trying to uncover various things about this program. This is their flagship anti-extremism program, and there's so much emphasis on youth, specifically in the choice of trying to cultivate school counselors and teachers as informants. And you'll see there's also emphasis on the school shooter narrative, which I can give a little bit of context for, that we're trying to uncover as many details about this program as possible. We want to know who they're training as informants. We want to know what they're training, police and informants to do. If they're using a risk assessment, we want to know details about that. We want to know the demographic details about which kinds of youth have been targeted, in which schools and which neighborhoods they're especially targeting people, a variety of things like that. And some of this, we know what to expect based on the way these programs have operated in the past. And a quick note about the school shooter narrative before we do a little bit of collective research all together. As Nadia said, the communities in LA and many people on this Zoom right now were deeply involved in defeating the Countering Violent Extremism program as it currently was in LA, defeating a grant to expand it, a $425,000 grant. And after that defeat, when the city, the police, they're not used to having, money for the police rejected. It's very rare in LA. They actually had contracted 2 agents. The Department of Homeland Security had contracted 2 academics to study the program and evaluate it and give the DHS and the LA city recommendations on how the program went or what could be done differently. And one of the things they did, they actually mentioned Stop LAPD Spying. They said between MPAC, which is an organization that was extremely in favor of countering violent extremism, to the point that they were one of the sub-grantees or community organizations participating with the police on it. Between MPAC and Stop LAPD Spying, according to these academics, there's a whole bunch of people and we need to learn how to reach them. So they wanted to try to find out how to reach people in the middle who haven't yet decided how they felt about the program. And one thing they advised is that it shouldn't be so obviously Islamophobic, because the original CVE grant, it almost exclusively, built connections with Muslim community organizations, and was very overt about targeting so-called Islamic radicalization or extremism. And this is not just in LA, but around the country. In fact, all 3 pilot programs were in cities with large Black Muslim populations. So they advised that it should be ideologically neutral and should focus on things like behavior instead of ideology. As we've been working on the coalition, though, behavior and surveilling behavior is always a proxy for race when the police do it. They're just using it as a way to say, oh, we're being neutral. Anyway, the point is, you'll see that when we look at these docs, one thing that they're heavily favoring is that now these programs, according to them, are not about looking for, radical Muslims or whatever the specter they have in their head. They're about stopping school shooters, according to the police. However, we on the Zoom know what happened in Uvalde. So we know where the police stand on school shooters and what they're good for and what they're not good for. We also know that in LA specifically, so much stuff has happened in terms of criminalization of youth for the sake supposedly of stopping school shooters, including metal detectors, random searches, all these various things. So I just wanted to prep you with that, because one of the docs that you'll see when we do this activity is heavily talks about school shooters. Now, Nadia mentioned PRA, that stands for Public Records Act. Together, we're going to do an activity right now based on what we normally do in our research meetings. I have collected some of the documents that we've gotten from the LAPD under this act. We've basically forced them to give us these documents. And what we're going to do is based on, you can choose. So hopefully everybody has access to this folder. I've, kind of sorted them into 3 categories, but you can choose any document you want in this folder. We're gonna keep. Oh, yes. Sorry. Oh, yes, Nadia, sorry. The process. The reason that we're doing this activity is because the coalition has a very different process about research than a lot of other groups and a lot of other people. Public Records Act requests are usually initiated by 2 types of people, journalists or lawyers. And even now, journalists and lawyers get very much preferential treatment when it comes to giving documents. In fact, there have been times that we've had to sue the LAPD to get documents that we're rightfully entitled to under the act. We've actually won several lawsuits against the LAPD to give us documents. But we always initiate public records requests through collective research and through organizing among the community and with each other. We don't do it by relying on what lawyers and journalists find to be important, because journalists are looking for what's newsworthy and lawyers are looking for what is violating the Constitution, but the community is looking for what is useful in organizing. And that's a completely different question. So we are interested in different things, and not only that, it's part of our philosophy of abolitionist organizing is to not rely on lawyers and journalists to do the work for us, but to view abolition as a collective process. So based on that, everybody has access to this folder. And we're going to do a little taste of what we often do in our research meetings. If you come to our research meetings, it's a very relaxing affair. I think Fatima and Yahya have been to several. We generally put on some music and look at documents together for 45 minutes or an hour, and then share what we found afterwards. Okay, before we transition to looking at the documents I sent out, does anybody have any questions about what we covered? And then we'll do the activity together. I know it was a lot. Any questions? They don't, no question is too small because I know we have some new people here.
This is Matteo speaking. I've got a question for any of the educators or even educating adjacent people in the room, and just wondering, if this is all new to you, like, have you seen anything that kind of bears a similarity? Have you seen students targeted in one way or another in your schools, or have you heard from any of the youth in your life? I guess that kind of resembles this, or yeah, anything at all. Like, yeah, I guess would have been y'all's experience.
I mean, this isn't exactly new to me, but I have people in my life who have been on like watch lists since they were 6 years old as terrorists because they were practicing Muslim. And while it's not particularly shocking, it is really, really grotesque and upsetting.
You can go ahead, Ahmed.
Yeah, I was just wondering that I know that we've talked quite a bit about, violent extremism and terrorism and how people are being impacted. But that's not really the language, and the most impacted, I guess, if we look at the majority of the communities, those are young Black and brown folks who of just gang affiliation and gang identities and chronic offenders and perpetual offenders, and these are the same things. So are you also sort of asking folks if similar things have happened in sort of non-Muslim communities as well? Just clarifying that.
Totally. Yeah, it doesn't have to be this whole extremism note. It's really like, how are you seeing the youth in your communities targeted? And that's not always obfuscated as extremism, right? Sometimes it's just straight up racist.
Thank you.
So before I was doing grad school full time, I was a special education teacher in New York City in the South Bronx. And sometimes the way that folks ask you to write incident reports or like special education IEPs to get kids who are dealing with the most stuff at home, like they'll ask you to describe them as more violent, or they'll ask you to put in that they're gang affiliated, so that they can push the kids out of the school, which obviously, if you give a shit about your students, you don't do that, but it is like a thing that happens in schools.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Sydney. I think we've seen a couple similar things here, but yeah, I think that's something we want to learn more about locally.
Yeah, one thing we've already seen before is we've seen articles that focus on Black immigrants that talk about the intersections, according to these academics, between like strategies for policing gangs and strategies for policing extremism. And we've seen that there already were for a long time programs designed to supposedly reduce the risk of a youth joining a gang, or assess that risk. I'm curious if any of you have seen programs like that at your school, like gang risk assessments, gang like what they call it, violence reduction programs. Some of them, they sound benign. I'm just saying this is like the stepping stone to CVE according to these academics. Okay, I think that then we'll it's okay if you haven't seen, the whole point is also finding out. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a second to try this activity together. I'm going to reshare the folder of documents, and if you haven't yet, try to find a document that looks interesting. Not DSA, excuse me. That was a interesting Freudian slip. A DHS agent, a Department of Homeland Security agent, that are in the emails. There's training documents from a training that happened in September, where they trained a whole bunch of LAPD officers in PATHE. Oh, they said I was frozen. So I was saying right now we're going to transition into doing the research activity altogether. So if you can, please click on the link in the chat and try to find a document that you might be interested in. There are emails, There are guides and papers written about PATH that kind of talk about the PATH philosophy according to the LAPD's mental health unit. And there are training documents from a training the LAPD did in in September, where they were training officers in how to do the PATH program. So when you're reading it, try to think of one, what is interesting or stands out to you or you find to be noteworthy, and two, try to think of what additional research questions you have, like what else you want to know about the program or similar programs having read this, like what questions come to mind, because we can brainstorm all those questions together and come up with a new public records request after this. So we'll do this for, how about, since I think Tiff is already on, let's do this. Oh, yes, Nadia.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think one thing I wanted to say too is, and my apologies if you said this, Akhil, just to encourage folks because as Akhil was mentioning, right, like we know that when like lawyers and journalists are looking at it through their own lens, so one of the ways to kind of look at it is maybe thinking of how your own community, you yourself, or folks around you have been, targeted and criminalized, and maybe thinking about what are some questions you might have about this program in terms of how it would impact you, or what are some sort of trigger words you see that maybe bring that up for you? I just wanted to that's kind of one way to help think about it too.
And to answer Sydney's question, we have one that we use in our research meetings, but I think right now, if you want to write stuff down just on your end to remember, and then you can share. And if you're interested in doing this activity more in depth, again, our research meeting is this Thursday at 5. But let's do this for 7 minutes. How does that sound? It's okay if you only get through a couple pages. So pick up any document. They all have really interesting stuff in it. Let's do it for 7 minutes. And can we get a volunteer DJ?
Yeah, I could probably play something. It's going to take me a minute though.
Okay.
If anyone's at the ready on the ones and twos, so to speak.
mind that you cannot waste, and the other one price that you cannot fix. This is the peace that you cannot buy. Finding a way when you cannot see. Man with this system, he cannot pray. I need to find release. But behind my mind, it rhymes. All these thoughts have trouble name. Finding to give up my pain. Finding to be on my lane. My mind running to the other side. When it's time to leave my life, then it tries to take me out. Tell you what I need, right? Yeah, I really need my love. I really need to free my love. I really need to know. I need to free my mind now. I really need to know. I really need to free my love. I really need to know. Oh, yeah. To set me free, freer than the open mind, farther than the eyes can handle, freer than the ocean now. Yeah, yeah. To set me free, now I need to find release. Set me to the open sky. Now I need to free my mind. Yeah. Boom, 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 boom. Hey, I don't, yeah, oh no. I might be falling deep. 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 Tell me now what you need. I've been going to God when I'm all in my mind. I might be falling deep. Falling deep. I might be falling. I might be falling. I might be falling. I might be falling, yeah. I like tracksuits and afros. The boys don't like that though. I wear my hair in a bun. My hair don't reach my bum. I'm at the bottom of the list. Never been kissed. The boys don't like my hair in an afro. I wanna feel like a woman, but I don't got the body for that. Too small, nothing there at all. I checked 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. No more years to grow. I'm stuck like this, and you know the boys don't like that. So if you wanna get with my
Last 2 minutes, everyone. And just a quick reminder to think about what questions come up for you as you read, and what do you find interesting or noteworthy. And also, if you don't get through a lot, that's completely okay. This is just a taste.
There's not many people with a smile like this one. You'd think I won a prize for these big eyes and those dimples on my cheeks and my back just above my ass. I like it like that. I like me like this. I like me like that. I'm liking my ass. If you wanna give me my love, get to know love. If you
All right, everyone. Just wrap up whatever sentence you're reading right now, and I'm excited to hear what you all found. I saw that Sydney and Yahya had posted some stuff in the chat. I don't know, Yahya, do you want to start us off with something you saw? Something scary that you saw? Because it is scary shit.
Yeah, so I was reading the PATHE docs for research, request 22-11177 folder contents redacted release. So the document's called PATHE Preventing Targeted Mass Violence Through Holistic Multi-Agency Interventions. I got through the executive summary, key recommendations, and the overview. What I found concerning, or what I found interesting, is kind of how much of the language used to talk about this kind of dovetails with like language around like restorative justice. Essentially, it really feels kind of like a co-optation of restorative and transformative justice, but for criminalizing and policing, essentially. So a lot of it is about de-escalation and, you know, intervention, prevention, things like that. But all of those things require more policing, right? And all of those things, or at least they're what they're offering as like the way to implement those things is more policing, right? And yeah, so like one example is they talk about co-response models. So what that means is they say pairing law enforcement personnel with clinicians for immediate on-site, on-scene field assessments to bring cross-disciplinary quote unquote expertise and tools to real-time encounters. So like literally increasing policing like in medical facilities, right? Like that's, you know, to me, like pretty concerning. And then another one was establishing a consolidated regional mental health database. So like, I don't know, I'm just imagining like how concerning it would be to know that like your mental health, like, you know, status is being documented in like a database that's being shared across multiple, you know, quote unquote, being multiple agencies, for the sake of, you know, monitoring you and surveilling you and you know, supposedly trying to identify potential violence ahead of time. But really like that just is so much, you know, such a invasion of not just an invasion of privacy, but it's like really you know, I think it really deteriorates trust. And then one thing I also found interesting and concerning was the talk about consultation, and they talk about essentially that confidentiality and HIPAA requirements. So like, you know, requirements about you know, patient data and like student data and things like that, and that, you know, prevent certain professionals from being able to report everything. They talk about those essentially as like barriers and kind of almost encourage going around them, you know. So I found that also really concerning and scary. And yeah, just the general you know, underlying thread of recruit more potential informants, essentially from the community, from the people around a quote unquote concerning member, or concerning community member. It really feels just like, you know, expanding the police state to you know, every, you know, institution, as well as like your close friends and loved ones, which is just you know, concerning. So I don't know, those are some things that came up for me.
Well, yeah, which document was that were you looking at again?
Sorry, I'm muted. The one titled PATHE Preventing Targeted Mass Violence Through Holistic Multi-Agency Interventions. Holistic multi-agency interventions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. And last question to you before we go to someone else. Did you think of it? What were like some further questions about the program that it might bring up for you?
Yeah, so I was really interested in kind of, they talk about, like you mentioned earlier, like it sounds benign, right? They talk about like you know, some things that they said here. Prevention does not require prediction. De-escalation is the primary goal. Uh, like it doesn't seem like it's about criminalization, but like I wonder, when they go into the like what does prevention look like? What does de-escalation look like? Um, what does that really look like essentially? And why, like something that came up for me is like, they talk about, multi-agency like collaboration and increased funding for social services and things like that. And it's just like, why does policing have to be part of that? Why do they cite like the LAPD as like the body, like the core central body that needs to be involved in all of this, you know what I mean? So yeah, like it'd be great if they gave more funding and like there was more collaboration between these entities and whatnot in a way that wasn't criminalizing,
100%. Thank you. Yeah. Can we have another volunteer share? Thank you so much. Yeah. I see. Another volunteer who got to check out a document, share a little bit of what they saw that was interesting.
Yeah, I really resonated with what you were sharing because I had a lot of the same thoughts come through my head when going through it was in the training doc, the first release. And I happened to look at some other doc, just looking at some things, and it kind of reminded me, because it was saying who the writers was of it. So it kind of reminded me like, oh yeah, cops are making these trainings on PATHE. So like when they're talking about like how there's not 100% there, you can't 100% profile someone and you can't 100% prevent mass shootings and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it's really convenient for departments like the sheriff's department and the police department to say that, oh, we can't do our job right because they need to incarcerate people in order to keep their jobs and to keep their pockets lined. So when they're talking about all of these like reasons why like people need to be on the lookout, and wow, look at this array of like from racist to trans people, you got mass shooters all over the place. Like, what are you going to do? It's like, well, instead of digging deeper and wondering like, what kind of care do young people need to make them feel like they don't need to go out and like shoot people? Like, let's talk about like all these things that, yeah, we can't profile, but look at the profile of all these diverse school shooters. It's like, it's very convenient that for them to like make this seem like they can't get it right because it's their job to lock people up and to kill people they think are criminals. And while I was reading it, what I was really curious about, and maybe I didn't go all the way through the PATHE training like far enough, but I want to know what the off-ramp is for this program, because the way that they really are trained, they're trying to portray this program is like all doom and gloom. Like if you're not checking the doors and locking things and looking at students like twice and, doing all of this like really like invasive things to young people, like what is the end goal where we don't need all of these systems of surveillance on young people? Like I'm really curious if there's a way to, if there is any thought into like how this plan could be not forever, or maybe they didn't think that far ahead and they're just like trying to slap a band-aid on something and call it the solution, So I'm kind of like, that was my question, is like, is PATHE the end goal, or is there an off-ramp to this? Like what if best case scenario, if it does work, then how do we phase it out for being such an invasive program,
So it's interesting. So two things. one is just us personally as the coalition, just our philosophy is we don't take their word for it in a sense. Like we don't believe what they say their intentions are, especially because we're basing it off of history and like this idea of like following not only like for the 10 years of the coalition's history, but thinking of PATHE as like the latest line from like COINTELPRO and a variety of other programs. But sometimes talking about their stated intentions is great for pointing out hypocrisy. And I love that you did that. One thing of that really quickly, I know that Gilbert raised their hand just before, the word off-ramp is so interesting that you chose that, because you talked about that as like the off-ramp from the program, but it's interesting because that's part of their theory about how the program works, is it gives people off-ramps from the road to extremism. Yeah, exactly. And they say they give services. And one question I had as a spin-off of your question is, what do their services look like? What services are they giving people? And like, what data do they collect along with those services, etc.? So I love that your question brought one for me. I saw Gilbert raise their hand.
Yeah, I was looking at
Oh,
it.
sorry. I'm so sorry. I mispronounced your name. Gilberto, sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. You can call me Gilbert. I'm used to it.
I just didn't see the O. I'm sorry. Go for it.
But one of the things that I noticed when you guys were talking and reflecting on some of the stuff that I read, it's pretty much they're criminalizing mental health, as simple as that. And this pretty much gives them the opportunity to say anybody is liable of it if you have a mental situation. As simple as if you're depressive or with anxiety, it's that pretty much make you a subject of being a criminal, which in fact that's not the truth. And everything that they put in on the paperwork is just a bunch of series of kind of procedures that they have to follow. But the main question, and we have this question on the summer, I was having abolition studies at Cal State. The main question is, are the police officers trained enough to be able to determine who is who? Do they have the capabilities of understanding if the person has a mental situation, and how can they de-escalate it? And they don't. Nobody has that. And in some of the papers that you read, the training is only 8 hours. To be a social worker, you have to have at least 60 units in order to be at some level. If you want to be a little bit more knowledgeable, you have to go another 60 units on your master, and that still doesn't make you capable of knowing who you're dealing with. So 8 hours, it's a futile effort for them to prove, that whatever they're proposing on this program, it's just targeting minority communities where we have mental issues for all the social distress that we go through on daily basis. They're taking our jobs out. They're criminalizing us all the time. We are target of so many other stuff. So for sure, we're gonna have mental issues, and they're not targeting that problem. They're making us criminals at the point, that there's no way to come back. And if this is implemented, everybody's liable for it.
Absolutely, Gilberto. Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to ask, based on what you read, did you also have any questions that you would like to learn more about the program? What would you want to know about the program, having read this?
I gotta be honest with you. There's two things that the pinpoint over here, because I'm a father of an autistic son. My son is 25. He's not violent, but he's autistic. So in an outburst of something happening, because he's been autistic, he's going to be targeted as pretty much a terrorist. So that worries me. That's one thing. The other thing is I'm a sociologist, and my thing is to fix problems, and this is not fixing the problem. So my main question is, if this goes through, how soon can we get it down and find a better program that is going to be more inclusive? And when I mean inclusive is as parents, of mental health patients to come forward and say, you know what, we don't need this kind of policing. We need support. We need mental health clinics. We need counselors. We need special forums where we can express, and that goes for everything, that goes for depression, anxiety, ADHD, because that's a global thing, addictions, people under addictions situations, all of this is included in it. And the way they put it in it is pretty much they're targeting everyone on that umbrella.
100%. And I saw Matheus raise their hand. Raise his hand.
Yeah, well, first off, I just want to say 100% to everything Gilberto was saying. Like, that was incredibly powerful and moving, and especially feel emboldened about this whole notion of tearing this down. I wanted to respond to a comment by Yahya in the chat about what accountability systems they have in place, and I kind of want to kick that off with a conversation about kind of how accountability has historically been used by the LAPD and policing, like even this notion of oversight, and that is we see accountability and oversight come into play as policies, as governing bodies that are at their best ineffective, right? They don't actually help in any way, but more so they're kind of a facilitation to continue doing this harm. What I mean by that is in LA, especially around LAPD, there are plenty of oversight bodies, right? There's one primary one, the Board of Police Commissioners, that oversees all these policies and audits in place to like kind of dampen LAPD violence. And of course that comes from, a history of LAPD racialized violence, but also these big reckonings with that racist violence. So think like, the 92 uprisings or even the George Floyd uprisings. And what comes out of that are these policies like I'm talking about, but how that's leveraged is what's important. So this is kind of an aside, but I promise it's related. Post 2020, the coalition, along with other community groups, knew that this kind of thing was going to pop off, this whole notion of oversight. And the conversation then was more so around a community police advisory board around technology. And so, the community resoundingly said, we don't want this. LAPD, in fact, couldn't find any support within the community. So they had to import support or manufacture and import support from Oakland through this guy, Brian Hofer at Secure Justices. So, to the opposition of everybody, they implemented a tech auditing and oversight system, an annual reporting system. And the first thing they did with that was they unanimously approved robot dogs for the LAPD. And that's kind of what we're experiencing right now. Similarly, if there was an accountability system around the PATHE program, it would be just to excuse the violence we know is going to ensue from any kind of programmatic, deployment of help coming from the LAPD. But what's interesting about PATHE specifically is that when we were fighting it, right? When we took it to public safety, when we organized around it in this most recent iteration, I know the coalition alongside our partners at PYM successfully knocked it down in 2018 before my time. We presented evidence, all this information of how it targets specific groups. And Marquise Harris Dawson on the Public Safety Committee took it upon himself to champion this program and say, you know what, we'll see in a year. We'll see if there's any harm in a year. So there wasn't even a feeling of we need some kind of safeguards in place. It's that theatrical. The concession was maybe some harm will happen. Let's see, maybe some kids, Black kids, Indigenous kids, Muslim kids will get hurt. We'll just see and wait and see what happens. So there isn't an accountability system. If it was, it wouldn't work because we know those things are just meant to facilitate the expansion of these programs.
And thank you, Matheus. I just want to say one quick thing to Gilberto. Unfortunately, the program has gone through, like they got the funding and they are currently building that 500-person team, they're currently doing trainings. The document that I think Anthony was looking at of the slides from the training that showed the different quote unquote diverse school shooters is the actual slides that were being used to train hundreds of police back in September. Ironically, they haven't given us the budget for this program or some other docs because they say they haven't been approved yet, but they've been doing the program for almost a year now. And we're still trying to find out more about it. So we fought it tooth and nail, and we're continuing to fight it. And we're going to keep fighting until we abolish it. We would love anybody and everybody here who's interested in joining us to join that fight, or to, if you're part of another organization, to get that organization to join the fight with us. I know Tiff is on to talk about grid, but I just wanted to ask, Tiff, do you have time for just if there's one more person who wants to share their thoughts on what they saw in the documents? Oh, maybe Tiff is not on. Well, until we hear from them, is there anybody else who wants to share now after Gilberto? Anybody who read or got to check out any of the documents who wants to share some of the stuff they found interest? Oh, Tiff is on. Okay. Nadia, go for it.
Keep it brief, but yeah, I just really appreciate what folks have shared, and I one of the ones I was reading, it was like the outline of a training, and it just made me think of how there was a part in there looking at okay, well, they want to hear from the students, the attendees, so basically other cops and people there, which I imagine probably includes like school administrators and things. So it just made me think of how like they're sort of asking for real scenarios because they want people to feel like this is applicable, this is helpful, this is what's needed. And so for me, I'm just already kind of gearing up at my school. There's just been some things happening lately, a lot more fights and a couple lockdowns. And so now the school's talking about bringing cops back on the campus. And so there's been these these optional after school safety meetings. So, I brought some of these things up around just where this can lead to. And so that was something that really stuck with me as to how that is also kind of being operationalized and quote unquote getting the participants' input. And then, just really thinking of like LAUSD's superintendent. He's just gross, like wanting, he not only his moving costs, getting $90,000 bonus, getting his pay increased to over $400,000 a year, and himself being very pro-police. So I'm just kind of thinking of how, in the second largest school district in the country of LAUSD, how this is going to continue to unfold. And I think, even though, yes, I think, Akil, you were saying how it's been passed already, right? But of course, like all these programs, like we do fight back, and the community has forced, for example, forced the predictive policing program out of LA, right? That was sheer community pressure. When the LAPD got drones, it was community pressure that grounded them for years. So yeah, I just kind of was thinking, all right, like this shit sucks, like it always has. And but I think our communities continue to fight back and everything. So yeah, just a couple of thoughts I wanted to share. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. We're gonna go in a second to Tiff to talk a little bit about Matios, yes.
Oh, no, just before we transition to Tiff, I did just want to kind of reiterate that, we got all this information through public records requests like we talked about. And if folks have any ideas for public records requests, any public records requests they're working on right now, our next meeting this upcoming Tuesday will be
Thursday.
Tuesday, our in person.
Oh, sorry, you're talking about the general meeting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Our in-person meeting at LA Can this upcoming Tuesday will be a PRA clinic of sorts. And so folks can bring their ideas. That's the flyer on Instagram, or, you know, whatever PRs they have in trans, or just even questions, and come through and come to a space where we're kind of working on that collectively. And I'll drop it again at the end of the meeting.
And there'll be a lot more of this on that Tuesday. But if you, in case you just want the site of how to do it in LA right now, this is what the site looks like. And when you make an account, you can just click make a request right here, and you can literally just write whatever you want them to give you. That's as long as it's like a record that is from a public institution, like the police or a school or like a government office or something like that. So I'm gonna put the site in the chat as well. But so yeah, if you want to learn all about public records, that's next Tuesday. If you want to specifically do more research with our group about PATHE and about other related extremism programs, we do a lot of research together with PYM, who's here right now, all about the role of Zionist organizations in these programs. Is very closely related to LAPD and how they are participating in these programs as well. So that's this Thursday at 5 p.m. for our working meeting for this group. And with that, I think we'll pass it to Tiff. Tiff, if you're ready to talk about a related program called GRID.
Yeah,
any-
hi folks. I'm so
Sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask if there were any last questions on that. I didn't give people a chance. Sorry, Tiff. Any last questions on what we just did before? No? Okay. Sorry, Tiff. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Hi folks. This is Tiff. I use they and them pronouns. Part of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I'm one of the group members, facilitators of our fight against data-driven policing, which meets on Tuesday, on the fourth Tuesday of the month. And yeah, really excited to be joining us here tonight. And so Akil, thanks for inviting me. And my understanding is that that you wanted us to be talking a little bit more about the GRID program, gang reduction and youth development, and kind of just a little bit more about what we're learning about that. Is that right?
Yes, and then maybe we can discuss any similarities or any kind of connections between that program and the War on Youth programs.
That would be great. And also, I just wanted to let folks know, like, yeah, this is this GRID program. This is something that we're just starting to take a look at in one of our working groups that is focused on community policing and LAPD's community policing programs and how the different ways those show up in, excuse me, in the community, and specifically looking at community safety partnerships. So this GRID program is all a part of that. And before I just talk a little bit more about what we're learning, I did want to just check and see, and I won't be able to see, but maybe Akil or someone can let me know, like, is this GRID program, and again, that's GRYD, Gang Reduction Youth Development. Do we have folks here who perhaps have heard of this, are already familiar with it in some way?
I don't see anybody immediately raising their hands.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to check because I think this is a pretty large program. It's very well funded. It's a program that was established through the. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
There was one person, Anthony.
Oh, please, yes.
No, I only heard a bit, so continue. I'm all ears.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to check because, as I said, it's a pretty large program, and it's been in place since at least 2007. And it's a well-funded program through the mayor's office, but most likely even if folks are maybe not familiar with like that actual name GRID, which is like the name of the the department within the mayor's office, folks may be more familiar with like the ways that it shows up. So yeah, I'll just talk a little bit more about it. So again, it was created in 2007, and the whole purpose and premise of it was to address gang crime in the community, and to do it through a supposed community-based approach. It is a location-based program. So the way that they kind of kicked it off and started it was by saying, okay, we need to identify those areas across Los Angeles that are most plagued by these gang problems. And so they did like a number of surveys, they gathered a bunch of information, and they established, it was either 8 or 12 what they called grid zones. And these were large areas that they were labeling as grid zones for being, having this like high occurrence of gang activity. And then within each of those zones, what they did is they hired contractors who were going to be grid service providers. And so that was part of the program, was kind of like the establishment of these zones, and then saying, okay, within each of these zones, we're going to set up these grid service providers. And then some of the things that they offered through these service providers included like programs for youth, activities for youth. Probably their most well-known activity that this program does is called Summer Night Lights. And this takes place, I think, mostly in parks across Los Angeles. I'm not sure if it's year round, but it's essentially holding this, like, I think they kind of schedule activities in parks within Los Angeles. It's very much, cops are very much a part of that. And they invite community members to come and engage with grid service providers and also with the police that are there. Another part of the services they provide are intervention workers, caseworkers. They have a lot of programs that are to do with identifying youth that they deem to be at a high risk for being a future gang member, being involved in gang crime. And so they have programs, youth programs, to kind of for these youth to be referred to. And in our research, it has been interesting, again, to see how, like I mentioned, that they work very closely, this GRID program and LAPD, of course, they work very closely together. And one of the ways that they actually find youth to screen with these, they call them like screening tools or survey tools to screen youth for these like potential to become a gang member or to become a criminal, is through LAPD's youth programs. And actually it was former LAPD chief Charlie Beck. He said that Summer Night Lights were a big piece of the department's interconnect with the youth and with GRID. And he also said that LAPD programs were essentially a feeder pool for these GRID, to get these screenings from GRID and to kind of divert kids to the GRID programs as well. So that's a little bit about some of the services that they provide and where they provide them. I'll pause there and see if folks have any questions. I don't know if that was super clear, but I'll just pause and see if folks have questions so far.
Tiv, or Yahya, would you like to ask that question out loud?
Yeah, sure. So Akil posted the LA Grid map of those zones that you mentioned. And when you click on one of the zones, it says LAPD, then it has a location, then it says PR and FCM, and it has locations for those. Do you know what PR and FCM are? I'm just not sure what those are.
That's very interesting. No, I don't know what that is either. That's great that you pulled up those maps. Thank you for doing that. But yeah, I'm not sure. And it looks like that's like a label on the map itself.
It's like each zone, so there's like highlighted zones, and then when you click the zone, it has like a table, and it basically says LA. So for example, I'm looking at like Southwest 1 is one of the zones, and it says LAPD Southwest, PR Southwest 1, FCM Southwest 1. So it's kind of almost like these are different bodies assigned to different regions within the zone, maybe, or something. I'm not too sure though.
Yeah, that is interesting, and that's not something I know about. I know they do sometimes designate within zones kind of different levels of priority that receive different levels of support of services, but that sounds like you're describing something different. So I can definitely take a look at that. Were there any other questions so far? I can talk a little bit more about what we know, but yeah, any other questions?
Hamid has a question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I just have a quick comment on the GRID program. Two things that, I didn't mean to, like, we didn't want to leave the impression that GRID, because offering services can create this very rosy picture, because the question is then what's wrong with GRID? Because they are supposed to be offering all these great services and intervention programs. I think it's really crucial to understand that is really where the hook lies. That where there's a failure to invest, just in the youth, as the earlier conversation was going on, as to to where people don't go down that path. There's no investment in schools. And if we look at the city's budget itself, that while it really just thumps its chest, and because we completely reject any of this stuff about programs and services and all of that, that when you look at the city's budget, their budget for the GRID program is $37 million. But when they look at the Office of Youth Development at the city of LA, their budget is about $1.4 million. So now when you do this comparative, what they're doing is that they have created this basically a job program and more money for the LAPD for after the fact interventions, when people are on that, or young people are on that pathway to gang affiliation or what have you, rather than the early intervention type thing, that how do you create conditions on the ground that where young people are, in having healthy food, or in youth centers, have youth jobs, and, just several other things. So I just wanted to share that not to leave an impression that these services and all are really just because we've seen that. I know that folks at YJC have done tremendous amount of research that how they hold young people hostage pretty much. And it's an extremely coercive environment for these young people. So I just wanted to just build on Tiff's, just description, and to add that to it.
Thank you, Hamid. And Tiff, Gilberto has their hand raised.
Yeah, and taking on the last comment, especially with these programs, and I know one of the things that we do here is to see what is the failing from the police to the community. And one of the things, especially on South Central, is that these special contractors are supposed to be there to supervise or to deter the crime, but many of the times the crime continues on the area, even though with the police present. And I have this particular comment because I have a friend that witnessed all of these situations in their neighborhood, and they question, what is the job they're doing, and that brings the questions in regards to the research that you guys do. What are your targets? Or what do you guys, the survey that you guys do, what's the communication you get back from the community? Because at the end of the day, and as the last comment mentioned, $36 million that go to a different program that can be instituted in the micro communities around our neighborhoods will be more helpful because we know what's going on in the community. We work with the community. And then when you give this money to these big corporations, many times, you know, they don't do the job that they're supposed to, and they just taking the money away from the community.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. And yeah, I just want to add that, like, yeah, as we talk about and are learning more about all these programs, it does seem very clear that like a big part of it is like the insertion of the city, the insertion of police like into these community spaces. And the purpose of that is to be surveilling youth. It is to be like supposedly screening youth for these kind of risk factors. So, you know, when we hear that, we understand that that's like deciding, you know, what is acceptable behavior, what is not acceptable behavior through the eyes of the city, through the eyes of police. And like GRID and LAPD, some of the things they do, they work together to actually hire kids like from the communities and from the places that they're stationed to work at these summer nightlight programs. They coordinate with each other to funnel kids into LAPD's youth programs, many of which are designed to funnel kids into the cadet programs, into being cops. And also one of the things that GRID is participating in with LAPD is within GRID zones in 2011, at a number of housing projects. And it started out in the Watts community and then also was added to Ramona Gardens and has been added to additional locations in Los Angeles. But starting in 2011, they started what's called community safety partnerships. These are all within GRID zones, and they all are a collaboration with GRID as well, and also with the Housing Authority, LA Housing Authority. And it was stationing cops, placing 10 cops in these housing developments with the purpose of surveilling people there, kind of, again, inserting themselves into the community under the guise of that they're building relationships with the community and that they're offering these youth programs. But, you know, as folks have indicated, when you look more closely at that, it really is what it seems to be is just LAPD looking for that opportunity and GRID looking for that opportunity to be further inserting themselves into people's homes and communities. And yes, offering these services that people desperately need, but they don't need that through, you know, these policing programs and surveillance programs. So that's kind of some of the ways that GRID and LAPD are working together, and also just like reading some of what was shared in presentations at LAPD Police Commission meetings, like from some of these providers. You know, they talked about, like there was one quote that stood out to me. I think this is from a 2013 meeting. LAPD said about GRID, it's been a fantastic relationship. The engagement with CSP officers, that's Community Safety Partnership officers, and the GRID intervention workers on site is amazing. There will be a GRID worker standing in front of the high school and a CSP officer talking, coordinating, exchanging text messages, coordinating on specific youth, knowing their first name, their last name, and their relationship with the housing authority. So it does seem to be very much a program of surveillance of youth, of constantly to be screening youth. And yes, offering these programs and services, but with this very specific focus on getting youth involved into those programs and getting more information about them. So yeah, so that's, just wanted to add that. That's some of what we're learning so far.
And Tiff, I just wanted to jump in real quick about, well, in the whole resource discussion, especially as Gilberto and Hamid were talking about, you know, with stuff like GRID, it is like kind of related, you know, it's our money, our resources effectively through tax dollars, and like it's a system in place ultimately to criminalize youth specifically. But I also wanted to bring up that LAPD also gets funds and resources through private donations. And one thing that came to mind, Tiff, when you had brought up how it's used to kind of like funnel people into the pipeline of like becoming a cadet or whatever, was, you know, this whole Building Blue Bridges nonprofit that we've seen kind of take off in 2020 or 2021, where they take, I think it's primarily high school age youth, if folks can correct me if that's not the case, and make them do marches with LAPD. And I don't know if folks heard, but earlier this month, LAPD with students from Dorsey High School, primarily Black students, and I can find the Spectrum article and add it to the link, actually did a march with LAPD did a march with Dorsey High School students for Tyree Nichols, which is disgusting on its face, across the 6th Street Bridge. And they label it the Good Trouble march. Anyway, so they concluded the march at LAPD headquarters and then had the students use a force simulator, which is another, and if folks don't know, that's like, you know, the armed force simulator that LAPD practices with to kind of emulate situations in which they have to kill people. And that in itself is also a private donation through the Los Angeles Police Foundation, which I'm assuming is where some of the funding comes from for building Blue Bridges. But again, these are like good things ultimately. Well, nothing I just described is good, but it's advertised as like resources for these youth at Dorsey High School, but it is tied to you know, a gun ultimately, and this indoctrination of youth to revere policing, right? Or even, you know, thinking about Tyree Nichols, to not tie the LAPD to police violence over in Memphis.
Also, Tiff, just so you know, Yahya shared this paper. It's a final report evaluation on GRID's family case management system, which is evidently what FCM stands for. And it's got one of our infamous people that we've been organizing against for years, Jeffrey Brantingham, as well as Georgia Leap and all these various people on the GRID evaluation team, you know, across USC, UCLA, Cal State LA, and even some school in Utah. And then there's a whole bunch of details about GRID. So if you haven't seen it, I can email it to you. Thank you, Yahya, for finding it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
And Tiff, would you be able to talk a little bit about the Google form risk assessment that you found?
You know, I wouldn't really be able to say much because I didn't look at it too closely so far.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, but I mean, I can, yeah, I don't know if you have additional questions, but I did just want to mention that when we all did get together, we were in our, as I mentioned, this is kind of coming from our community policing working group, and we were glad to have folks from this group meet with us recently and kind of get this conversation started. And following that, we did make a list of a few different like research questions that we had for ourselves in terms of like, what are the questions that we have about this program? What do we want to be looking into and learning more about? And I can share some of those, but I also like if folks have additional questions or things that they would like to learn more about, we would love to hear what those are as well. And I thought of that, Akil, because one of those that we have on there is learning more about the screening form. And then some additional things we're learning more about what is the overlap with PATHE, learning more about the funding for GRID, And then also just like mapping out the grid universe and like some of who are these different collaborators, and you've already named a few just now. And then another one that a great question you had, Akil, was like, what is the extent of like, is this voluntary participation in these programs? And I did read a little bit about that today in terms of LAPD was talking about its programs, all of the different youth programs that it offers, and some of them are like, I think it's called a Jeopardy program, and they have a few other programs which are actually offered to kids who are arrested for the first time, and they are given a choice of, well, we can, you know, you can be arrested or you can accept admission into one of these programs. So, and I believe that GRID may be one of those. So just kind of learning more about that as well.
Thank you so much, Tiff. Any last questions about GRID, about PATHE from earlier, about the coalition, if you're new to the coalition on the call? I
Okay,
wanna, oh, sorry.
I'm just gonna drop that flyer one more time. If folks have any questions about the GRID program or any PRA ideas, they should roll through next Tuesday at LA Can at 6 p.m. and we'll be having that clinic.
And I really want to thank all the new people who came today, and especially if you, you know, shared some thoughts and ideas and questions with us. Highly encourage you to keep coming on Tuesday evenings, but also if you're interested specifically in the work we're doing in this group, trying to fight the PATHE program, to join us on a Thursday at 5 p.m. Or if you're not available at that time, please just email the coalition at stoplapdspying@gmail.com, and we would love to find another time to connect with you. That's a virtual meeting. Oh, hey, Paula. It's been a long time. That's a virtual meeting. It's on Zoom, so you can get the Zoom link again by emailing the coalition at stoplapdspying@gmail.com. And I don't know if Hamid and Matios have any announcements before.
No, I'm so sorry, Akil. Maybe I missed that. You must be talking about another meeting. Next Tuesday's meeting is in person.
Yes,
Oh,
but
okay.
the one
Sorry. My bad.
Thursday for
Got it.
the War on Youth is virtual.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Tuesday in person, 6 p.m. in Skid Row at LA Can. 2 days from now, Thursday, is virtual, and to get the link, you can email stoplapdspying@gmail.com. Oh, I see. I'm not sure which one Paulo was asking about, but we just said both. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that's it, you all. Unless there are any announcements.
I think that's all we've got. Thank you, Akil. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Tiff.
Yes, thank you all. Have a great evening, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank you
folks.
all.
Good night.
Valentine's Day. Take care.